Prisons, both terrifying and fascinating, but hopefully never experienced. Luckily, it's a fascination shared by novelists, scriptwriters, directors, and actors, who have come together over the years to make some of the truly great movies of our time. And we'll be ranking them in a top 10, which you'll no doubt disagree with. As prison movies go, Green Mile is as sedate as you could hope for one to be. The underlying tale is utterly traumatic, but it's punctuated with scenes of a nostalgic warmth that raises your spirits high enough to hope, before reminding you of the reality of 1930s America, especially if you were a black man that could knock out a bear with one punch. The Green Mile is more about the continuing injustice of racism in America than an exploration of prison culture. Centred around one small block of death row inmates who are rarely out of their cells at the same time, it focuses on the personal and professional relationships between the guards and prisoners. Tom Hanks brings his usual effortless charisma to the role, expressing his growing turmoil with every twitch of an eyebrow, as it becomes increasingly clear they have to execute an innocent man. The man in question has the mind of a toddler, and dungarees to match, and is not only innocent, but can heal people. Not by getting them on stage and screaming "heal" to the heavens before pushing you to the floor as they swipe a tenner from your wallet, but by the kind of power only fiction can justify. Unfortunately, as we said, he's a black man in 1930s Southern America, which means rather than becoming the head of a global church, they electrocute him, which is a whole lot better than crucifixion. So maybe we have moved on as a society. Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor were one of the great double acts, even though they were never consciously supposed to be one. And the fact they did a prison movie means we get to wedge them into yet another top 10. The usual caveats to the language of the period remain, as do the reminder that they used it to highlight and mock the casual racism of the time, rather than perpetuate it. Stir Crazy is essentially a series of sketches loosely tied together by a story about our two wrongfully imprisoned heroes. It plays on every prison stereotype you could ever imagine, and several more that only comedy geniuses can come up with. From the moment they walk into the cells and put on a performance to show the other inmates how tough they are, it's difficult to know where the script ends and two funny guys making each other laugh begins. If you're not going to take prison seriously, then there's no better example of it than this. Once you've gotten over the shock of seeing Burt Reynolds without a moustache, the tale of a star quarterback ending up in prison begins to wash over you. Containing all the grit of any self-respecting movie made in the USA in the 1970s, it flips and blends enough silliness and humour to remind you that at the heart of it is a fun romp. When the corrupt warden suggests a game between the prisoners and the guards, Burt uses his cheeky smile to enlist all the lunatics with vendettas against the officers, with the promise they can punch and kick them to their heart's content for the duration of the match. But when the warden tells Burt to throw the game, we have jeopardy, questions of morality, friendship, betrayal, and all those other things films are supposed to include. Will he? Won't he? What's that? You've already skipped to number 7? Anything with Robert Redford in is instantly 2 stars better than it would be without him. Not something I can prove without a time machine and a lot of planning, but we live in a time where proof is for idiots, so I'm claiming it as a fact. Brubaker was essentially undercover boss on the big screen, and with a slightly more arduous experience than stacking shelves with Doreen. Brubaker is a new inmate at a particularly horrific prison in America. Unfortunately for the abusive guards, who implement unforgiving treatment to all who enter, he's actually the new warden, and instantly sets about reforming the wrongs he witnessed. Loosely based on the real-life experiences of a warden who had tried to right the wrongs of the system without pretending to be a prisoner, Brubaker finds the higher up the chain he goes, the more resistance he faces, eventually being dismissed from his role. Over time, the system learned to hide its corruption better, rather than address it. But with the current incumbents in the White House, we'd say they no longer even have to hide it. Just promise to hurt everybody who isn't loyal to the chief. Britain's sole entry on the list, and not one that's a pleasant experience, where everybody comes together for a group hug and acknowledgement of their wrongdoing. Set in a juvenile prison in the 1980s, we follow 3 inmates upon their arrival, each with contrasting futures. Ray Winstone defined himself for life with his portrayal of a good-natured and well-meaning hard man who assumes the role of boss, or as he famously termed it, the daddy. His fellow newbie quickly becomes a victim of the other inmates, and after a series of brutal events, ends his own life in an equally visceral scene. The film was intended as an expose of the Borstal system, and was banned in the UK until many years after it had been dismantled. It was more a process of torture than rehabilitation, although I'm not sure we've grasped the importance of rehabilitation over punishment some 40 years later. It makes for an uncomfortable but compelling watch, and well worthy of anybody's time. If any actors can claim to be Robert Redford's equal, Paul Newman is one of them, and Cool Hand Luke is arguably his defining role. Set on a prison camp housing a chain gang, rather than a giant institution crammed with cells, Luke's relatively minor crime should have seen him free within a few years, and the backbreaking work an inconvenient memory. However, his defiance of the system at every turn may well win him the respect of his inmates, but it means other than a few brief periods of escape, he never lives as a free man again. Made during the Vietnam era and the growing distrust from the public of the American government, his refusal to comply is often seen as a metaphor for the era. You know a movie is at its mark when it spreads beyond the confines of the screen and seeps into everyday life, and the phrase, "What we have here is a failure to communicate," has become its own polite way of justifying smashing somebody's head in. Completing our trio of legends, it's Steve McQueen. Only Papillon is not necessarily the first role that springs to mind when we think of him. Based on the autobiography of the main character, Papillon is sent to a prison deep in the jungle of French Guiana. Befriending the enigma that is Dustin Hoffman, they pair up, McQueen providing the protection and Hoffman the cash. Cash that's used to fund a series of escapes, each with varying degrees of success, but all of which ultimately fail due to betrayal. Papillon focuses on the unbreakable spirit of the lead, and his refusal to accept his fate. Even placing him in solitary confinement for 2 years, a quarter of which was in complete darkness, wasn't enough to get him to give up his accomplices. Living alone during the pandemic was tough, but if I'd have been denied Netflix for more than 3 hours, I'd have cracked. Before we get to the only bit of the countdown you're really interested in, don't forget to like us and subscribe. Our egos are shallow and fragile, which is why we're on the internet crying out for validation, and our bank balances are empty. You don't even have to give us any money, the advertisers give it to us. All it costs you is a click you'll never even remember doing, and the occasional notification that we're back with more insightful content. Alcatraz, the inescapable prison. So how can there be a film about an escape? That's why it's one of the big 3. Clint Eastwood plays Frank Morris, a criminal genius who has repeatedly broken free from every institution they house him in. We'd question the term genius, mainly because he's ended up in prison. And he may be good at getting out, but he's terrible at staying there. There wasn't even any internet or CCTV back then. Just move somewhere remote, get a haircut, grow a beard, and call yourself Keith. Anyway, the plan is pretty smart, and the film lays it all out at a steady pace that rarely raises the heart rate. Relevant of the crimes they committed, you can't help but root for them. I blame the warden for goading Morris in the first scene. Anybody who claims nobody's ever escaped from Alcatraz, and nobody ever will, is quite frankly asking for it. They definitely got out, but what happened afterwards remains a mystery to this day. So if you ever bump into a long-bearded, shaven-headed old chap named Keith, living in a town of 45 people, I imagine there's still a reward out for his arrest. Does anybody ever walk through customs in an airport and not worry their toothpaste may unknowingly be 80% cocaine? Imagine if you actually had 3 kilos of hashish strapped to your chest and a Turkish customs officer was wondering why his dog was going crazy. Billy Hayes was an American student who made a terrible choice during a trip to Turkey. One that meant it would be 5 years before he saw home again. And that choice wasn't to get a job in a bar and expand his horizons. As terrifying as the thought of prison is, being locked up abroad leaves me one funny look away from a full nervous breakdown. It may well be due to this film, which I watched when I was about 12. Midnight Express is a slow descent into madness. the daily brutality, the friends that are taken away from a talking to and never return, the hopelessness of having a 4-year sentence extended to 30. Bit by bit, Billy Hayes falls apart and gives in, until his girlfriend, in a rare visit, slips him a few $100s and tells him to book his ideas up. The film offers us a more dramatic and heroic tale of escape than reality suggests, but slipping someone a tenner and then opening the door makes for terrible cinema. However it unfolded, Midnight Express deserves its spot at number 2 for cinematic brilliance, and making me curl up in a ball while I watched it. Boring, yes, we know, but putting Shawshank Redemption anywhere else on the list would be doing so just to generate clicks and controversy. And as much as we're desperate for people to pay attention, we cannot betray our true thoughts. There's a reason this film regularly appears in the top 10 of all time, and that's because it's utterly brilliant. If you manage to avoid this movie, then I don't want to be the one to spoil it with too much detail, because it pulls you deep into its emotional bosom and doesn't let you go until the credits start rolling. If you can think of a better narrator than Morgan Freeman, then you're thinking of the wrong voice. If you can think of a better strapline than "Fear can hold you prisoner, hope can set you free," then you may have watched War Games quite recently and can be forgiven. The only way to win is not to play the game, take some beating. If you can think of a better image than a relieved man looking at the sky in torrential rain, then you may have recently purchased a Batman poster. Look, the point is, Shawshank Redemption is a marvel, and for anything else to be considered the best prison movie ever would be a lie. So, that's it. Feel free to discuss our arrogance and idiocy in the comments below. Once you subscribed, liked, yada 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 yada. You know the drill. Just, come on. Click the button. Go on, you know you want to. Yeah, do what you want.